How is energy diplomacy impacted by the ongoing conflict in the Middle East with rising costs? An investigation continues into the charges against an Illinois legislator. What is Project for Federal Accountability? And the data center frenzy continues. Welcome to the States, powered by the Center Square. It is Friday, August 7th, 2026, and I'm your host, Greg Bishop. Well, the next 48 hours could be very telling for what taxpayers here at home could be facing over in the Middle East, as the average price for a gallon of gas continues to be nearly $1 higher than it was this time last year. While the average is down from a week ago, it's still at $4.04 a gallon. Now, earlier this week, Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with the UK Foreign Secretary. The State Department announced that the two discussed the importance of Europe taking on a greater role in its own security, and they reiterated their shared commitment to safe transit in the Strait of Hormuz and ensuring that Iran never develops or obtains a nuclear weapon. Now, news reports indicate continued conflict over the strait and the free flow of oil on the water and also in pipelines across land. Now, yesterday, President Donald Trump acknowledged the high energy prices here back at home heading into the fall in an election year, with that ongoing conflict with Iran still unsettled.
I inherited the highest prices ever. I inherited the worst inflation in the history of our country. And we have done an amazing job. And oil prices now are coming down very rapidly. If you look at what's going on, it's down to 75. When I started the very important excursion into the Islamic Republic of Iran, it was a very important excursion because they can't have a nuclear weapon. Otherwise, the whole world would get blown up. We're not going to let that happen. Not only us, not only the Middle East, the whole world would have been catastrophic. We had no choice. We had oil down to less than two, in many places like Iowa. Oil was down to, gasoline was down at numbers that people hadn't seen in years. $1.85, $1.95 for the past Tuesday. I was in Iowa at a stop, and we had $1.95, another one, $1.85 a gallon. And we'll see those days pretty soon again, based on everything I see, as soon as the war ends. And I think it's going to end pretty soon. I don't think they can go much longer. Yeah.
Well, as we head into the weekend and what exactly to expect with the conflict in Iran and the impact on oil prices, let's talk with Matthew McManus. He is a Georgetown professor of energy diplomacy and a former State Department official, plus a visiting fellow of the National Center for Energy Analytics. Matt, thanks for taking time with us. A lot of uncertainty heading into the weekend, but what kind of things can you share with us to, I guess, ease some minds as to how the international system handles oil prices in this kind of environment?
Well, thanks for having me on the show, Greg, and that's a great question. And I think, we can take a moment. Oil is trading now in New York at $76 a barrel, despite an ongoing conflict in the Middle East. And you have to wonder, how does that happen? And I think that the good news, if you could call it that, is the institutions of international energy governance are working. We have a bipartisan investment in a strategic petroleum reserve that is now dispersing oil to the U.S. market, and our allies, as importantly, in IEA countries, which mainly Europe, Japan, South Korea, are doing the same. And somewhat, unexpectedly, you see China has huge reserves, 1.4 billion. Now, they're not as transparent as we are in the IEA, and of course, we would like them to be. But at the present moment, it's helpful that those reserves are there. And China has also cut back their importing of oil by some 40%. So in addition to that, you have the U.S. oil production at a record high, 13.6 million barrels per day. You have new production online, up 17% in Brazil, up 17% in Venezuela. And so markets are responding. And oil is getting to the market, and you can't beat the market. The price, again, is $76 a barrel. And I think that gives time for diplomacy. It gives time for military action if needed. And I think, I look down here, the street I'm right outside Washington, gasoline is $3.90 a gallon. So we do have time. We do have these emergency reserves, and we do have surging production, mainly really led by the United States. So those are all, I think, going to give diplomacy the time, hopefully, to resolve the crisis.
Matt, now this was before my time, but the energy crunch in the 70s, how much have we evolved from that type of situation where you ended up having crazy long lines of people trying to just get gas so they can get to work, to where we are now, where we have a conflict in the Middle East, expecting it to increase the volatility of the price of oil, but also the availability of oil. Talk us through how we've evolved over the past 45, 50 years.
So I'm about old enough to remember odd even days when we would drive to New Jersey from Pennsylvania to see my grandparents, where you couldn't fill up your car on a particular day. And so what really Washington did with Henry Kissinger, he created the International Energy Agency right at the State Department where I used to work. And that is a strategic stockpile of oil, again, not only in the US, but in our European and Asian allies. And it was at the ready. We've only used it about 5 times. We're using it massively now. It is a bipartisan investment in energy security. And also, the US is now the world's largest oil producer. So back then, when the price of oil increased, a lot of that money went to OPEC. And it left the U.S. Here, that oil is still, the money is still remaining in the U.S. and it's being invested in additional oil production. So I think it's a very different situation, and we have diversified our economy from oil in many ways, but we've also wisely invested in oil production and this huge energy security stockpile that we're using. It is getting to low levels, but it's there, and this is a significant disruption, is what it's for.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask, is just how long of this stockpile can we tap into?
We can go many more months. We have 304 million barrels left, and again, we've drawn down about 100 million of our 170 million barrel pledge, and China has a huge reserve as well. And one of the things we have exported to China is our oil dependency. Now they are the most oil import dependent country in the world. It's much more of a concern to them and to countries in the Asia Pacific, because we have become energy independent, although of course it's a global market and we're going to pay global prices.
Talk a little bit, if you can, about the geopolitics of China and Russia and global oil prices when it comes to the conflict in Iran. Is that something that people really need to be cognizant of?
I think they do, because in the case of Russia, you see increasing Ukrainian attacks on Russian refineries. You have multilateral sanctions on Russia for their invasion of Ukraine. And so Russia can only sell their oil under a prescribed formula. And in the case of China, you have this really unbelievable reduction of almost 40% of their oil demand. Now, many people believe they were building stockpiles into the crisis, and they've done that for many years. And now, of course, they've stopped that. And it would be helpful if they would be transparent, which they're not, about how much oil they're releasing onto the world market. But frankly, it's not unhelpful they have that stockpile. But if it could be integrated with the response of the West and they could be more transparent, it would be much better.
Conversely, it looks like we have some really strong allies in the Middle East. I'm talking about like Saudi Arabia and some of these other countries. What's the significance of that in the current status of the conflict in the Middle East?
Well, that's a really good question. So while the consumer countries invested in the IEA, Saudi Arabia and the UAE very wisely invested in redundant pipelines, right? You have the East-West pipeline to the Red Sea for Saudi Arabia, and you had the port of Fujairah in the Gulf of Oman for the UAE. That meant that even during the full shutdown of the strait, more than half of the oil was getting to world markets. That's very significant. And I think after the crisis is over, you're going to see a lot more investment in new pipelines and redundant ways to get oil out. Unfortunately for Qatar, they were unable to get their LNG out of the strait. And there are no similar, backdoor pipelines for LNG.
So what does that backup plan signal to Iran, for instance? Is it showing that Iran may not have all the cards when it comes to that shipping of the oil through the Strait?
Absolutely. The countries will go even further to diversify, not to be dependent on one route. Saudis have already shown a huge ability to move their oil, both through the Med and through Bandar al-Madab, which, of course, now, as you know, is being threatened by the Houthis. So that is a problem. And Iraq has a pipeline to Kirkuk. So all of these countries are looking immediately to make these major investments in new pipelines for their energy security.
And what about the dynamic between the Eastern Hemisphere and the Western Hemisphere? Is there more of a focus on trying to make sure that maybe not as much reliant on the either hemisphere from wherever someone's coming from?
The good news is we're already there. The locus of energy production has shifted from the Persian Gulf to not only the United States, but Venezuela, over 1 million barrels per day now, in line with the United States, and Brazil, major oil producer, about 3.3 million barrels per day. Again, they're up 14 to 17%. You have Argentina making investments in their shale oil. So the center of global oil production is no longer in the Persian Gulf, it's in the Western Hemisphere. And that has helped shelter the U.S. from this global energy disruption in a way that is very, very different than friends, allies, and strategic competitors and perhaps adversaries in the Indo-Pacific.
Well, and Matt, just to wrap things up, it's been extremely enlightening for me, and I'm sure the audience as well, just to better understand the geopolitics and the different types of mechanisms that have been put in place over the decades to help absorb some of the potential demands that there are in a conflict like what's happening in the Middle East. Encapsulate that for us as we head into the weekend. What should consumers be? Should they just have a little bit of resting in their mind to maybe not come back with a sticker shock at the beginning of the week?
100%. $76 a barrel is about where prices were at the beginning of the conflict. We've seen that both, government-led and private sector-led responses, including demand response, have all worked. There is time. There's a lot more oil in stocks, but when the Persian Gulf is closed, yes, you do run down your stocks, your commercial, your strategic. But when it is resolved, you will build them up again. So I believe that the American driver can take comfort in that there have been long-term investments by energy producers and energy consumers for a disruption, be it weather, be it a conflict in the Gulf, and it is working. Many people would have predicted, and they did, $200 a barrel oil in a situation like this. It didn't happen. It's not going to happen. I think we're going to be good for several more months, and I believe it will be resolved by then.
Matthew McManus, Georgetown professor of energy diplomacy and a former State Department official with 30 years plus of experience in the international energy sector, and also a visiting fellow for the National Center for Energy Analytics. Greatly appreciate you taking the time here with us here on The States.
Precedent has shown that this process is reserved for actions so egregious, so contrary to the core values of this institution, that we must act immediately to restore public trust.
That was Chicago Democratic State Representative Curtis Tarver Thursday, opening up the Illinois House Special Investigating Committee into Urbana Democratic State Representative Carol Ammons. Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop. That bipartisan committee decided it will move forward with their investigation into a number of complaints against that Central Illinois legislator, but only after the special committee receives input from the U.S. Attorney's Office that brought those charges against Ammons. So what exactly is Ammons facing? Well, the charges that are filed in federal court against her, multiple counts of wire fraud, providing false statements, and her husband, Adam Ammons, also charged in this set of crimes. They've both pleaded not guilty, with the trial set for September 22nd. If found guilty, up to 15 years in prison could be part of that punishment. Now, Tarver, chairing this special investigating committee, he made clear that Ammons will have rights all throughout.
Counsel also informed Representative Ammons that pursuant to the House rules, she will receive notice of all committee hearings. She has the right to be present and has the right to counsel during all the committee meetings. And she will have the opportunity to present at all hearings and to testify as otherwise, or testify with any relevant information.
Now, Tarver entered into the record and the staff and attorneys for the committee notifying Ammons' attorneys of the hearings and their right to appear and also to answer questions.
Counsel Bray spoke with Attorney Akbar and Attorney Rini about this process, and they informed counsel that neither Representative Ammons nor they would attend today's hearing, given that it's organizational in nature.
Now, the first hearing yesterday at the Illinois State House for that special investigating committee was only largely procedural. Now, Tarver said that Ammons was federally charged but hasn't been convicted, and they clarified that the hearing and the committee are set to determine only if she would be punished or removed from the House.
While Representative Ammons has been indicted, she has not been convicted of any crime. Under the Constitution, she's presumed innocent unless proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt following a fair trial. This committee is not a court of law, and we are not judging innocence or guilt. Rather, we are tasked with inquiring into the underlying facts to determine whether reasonable grounds exist for the discipline to be pursued by the House.
Now, Tarver reiterated that Ammons is invited to take part in the House process. Ammons was not present at the hearing yesterday, though the committee made Ammons aware of her right to appear with legal representation at all of the committee meetings.
The rights of Representative Ammons will be respected, and she will be given the opportunity to defend herself. Representative Ammons and her counsel will receive as much notice and information as possible. Representative Ammons and her counsels will have the right to be present at all public hearings. Representative Ammons will have the right to speak to the substances of these charges and provide this committee with any evidence that she believes will clear her of the charges against her.
Again, Ammons pleading not guilty in federal court. Her husband, Aaron, who is also the Champaign County clerk, pleading not guilty. They've got a trial set for September 22nd. We'll be monitoring that closely. We'll also be monitoring what's next for this bipartisan committee. But as Tarver, the co-chair of the committee, you've got Republican State Representative Dan Ugasti also on the committee. And Thursday, he noted that the hearing should remain nonpartisan.
While I can only speak for myself based upon discussions with other members, I believe much of what I say may be true for the Republican members of the committee and possibly all members. We have been asked to investigate, by all reasonable means, potential misconduct of a member and then determine if reasonable grounds exist to authorize charges against the member named in the petition. This is not a task to be taken lightly. It must be done transparently and seek the truth as to whether the misconduct alleged in the petition occurred. It is a serious assignment that I do not believe any of us ever sought when elected to the House, but we're willing to undertake when asked, both to make certain that Representative Ammons is treated fairly during the investigation, and at the same time, the integrity of the Illinois House of Representatives is protected.
Again, Ammons being charged with federal crimes. Alleged in that indictment is that she helped get contracts for nonprofits to her districts, which were hiring her daughter. There were also questions raised about campaign contributions and how those were characterized and paid back to Ammons. That, of course, is all part of that federal indictment filed several weeks ago where Ammons pleaded not guilty. Now, Republican State Representative Adam Ammons, he said, this should be a turning point for Illinois.
This committee cannot become another Springfield exercise in delays, doublespeak, excuses, and more political protections for insiders. Decades of scandal have destroyed the public's trust in state government. This must end. We cannot allow Illinois to continue to be known for corruption and ethical misconduct. We must follow the facts, conduct a thorough and transparent investigation, and hold Rep. Ammons accountable if she violated the public's trust. Today's hearing is only the beginning. We have a serious and somber task ahead of us. I am committed to giving this task the seriousness and level of commitment it deserves, and I hope all of us here will do the same.
Republican State Representative C.D. Davidsmeyer, one of the signatories that launched the Special Investigating Committee into Representative Ammons, addressed the committee regarding an amended version of that petition that led to the creation of the committee. Davidsmeyer said 4 charges from the initial petition, which included the entire indictment against Ammons, were removed in an amended version, which was agreed upon by the 11 initial signatories. Now, the last time a Special Investigating Committee convened at the State House was when the legislature sought to respond to charges that former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan faced back in 2020. Current House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch, he chaired that committee when Madigan was the Speaker of the Illinois House. But Welch, back then in 2020, he called it a sham political trial, denying that Democrats were protecting Madigan. Welch said, in ending that committee without any action, that they were, quote, guardians of the process against Republicans looking to go after Madigan, who was named as Public Official A in indictments against ComEd. Now, the former speaker, he was found guilty eventually by a jury in 2025. Those corruption charges he faced ended up landing him 7.5 years in a federal prison where he's now serving. Now, Davidsmeyer, yesterday, he said that he was more trusting in the current committee investigating Ammons. He told the Center Square outside of the committee room, I think Chairman Tarver will do a good job. I think I have a lot of respect for how he looks at things. It will be a little bit more robust than the committee that was kind of swept under the rug for Speaker Madigan. And so I think we'll see a little bit more out of this committee. Now, that committee voted to contact the U.S. Attorney's Office that brought the indictment against Ammons before moving forward with a second hearing. Here's the chair, Tarver, talking about the importance of that communication.
Consistent with the House's practice in the investigations of former Governor Rod Blagojevich, former Representative Derek Smith, and similar to the investigation into former Speaker Madigan, it is my recommendation that before proceeding further into gathering information, this committee should consult with the U.S. Attorney for the Central District of Illinois, Mr. Greg M. Gilmore, to avoid taking any action that he would consider an interference with an ongoing federal investigation. I would ask for approval that a letter be sent by this committee to Mr. Gilmore, seeking to obtain any relevant information that he possesses and to receive guidance on whether an investigation by this committee would be considered an interference with this federal investigation.
And that resolution was agreed upon by the entire committee. Be sure to get the latest on this story as it develops, both at the federal criminal level, but also at the State House investigative level. Get all the details at thecentersquare.com. We'll be right back with more from the States. Newly obtained documents the Center Square Enterprise and Investigation Units found raises substantial questions about how attorneys general across the country coordinated with each other to go after President Donald Trump months before he was the nominee. In what appeared to be called Project for Federal Accountability, nearly 24 state attorneys general banded together as early as April 2024 to plot litigation against Trump. Joining us to delve deeper into this story is one of the Center Square's EIU reporters. On top of this, investigative reporter Adam Ammons. Adam, there's a lot of layers to this onion, and I imagine we're going to be hearing a lot more about the different ways this story is going to go. But let's start with how the investigative team came across this project, or the rule of law working group, as you guys have found.
Yeah, this Project for Federal Accountability nickname was one of the very few things that was left unredacted on a batch of emails that my colleague TJ was able to obtain from the state of Washington and their attorney general's office. Now, the AG there talked on President Trump's first day in office about how they had been planning lawsuits against him for months. What we didn't know was the extent of it. And while some Democratic attorneys general have downplayed the extent to which they had been preparing for their nearly 100 lawsuits, others have been a bit more transparent, like Washington, like Maryland, where they did say, yes, this process did start months before President Trump won election and before he took office. We just didn't know that it would be this far in advance, April 2024, hypothetical lawsuits talking about hypothetical policies, really for a hypothetical president. Kamala Harris hadn't even announced her run for president by the time this all started.
And here we are a year and a half into the Trump administration 2.0, because he did eventually win in November of 24 and was in office in January of 25. And since then, we've had 100 different lawsuits against the Trump administration for a whole variety of different things. Seems like there's one at least every week, if not two. But before we talk about all the various states that are involved in all of this, yeah, Republicans banded together and they sued the Biden administration. But what makes this particular story different from what we saw, at least what we know of during the Biden administration?
I'm not aware of any lawsuits against the Obama administration or the Biden administration or even the first Trump administration where attorneys general were banding together this far in advance. I keep using the word hypothetical because there was no guarantee that Trump would be in office. There was no guarantee on which policies he would be implementing. Of course, he was making some promises along the campaign trail that might have worried Democratic attorneys general, but I'm not aware of any cases that were planned so far in advance. One of the people we interviewed for our story was the former Utah Attorney General, who was part of the lawsuit against the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. That started, according to him, after Obamacare passed, not before, even though that was a big case that took many, many months, ended before the Supreme Court with a mixed victory and a mixed defeat.
Adam, let's get into which states were involved in all of this. And of course, as you mentioned, this kind of came to light in a batch of documents from Washington state, but you guys were able to quickly find some other documentation to show who was all involved in this. Let's take a look at this map that's in the story at thecentersquare.com. And you can see, states that have sued that are Republicans for different reasons, or states that have joined with other states but haven't commented on this document, this agreement, so to speak. But all those blue states, the color blue there, those are people who are attorneys general who are confirmed to have signed this agreement from back in April of 24.
So not all of them were April 2024. Many of them were. If you go onto our website, thecentersquare.com, you can see an interactive version of that same map. Hover over your state and get a little bit more context. Hawaii is the only state we're aware of that joined after President Trump won the election. The rest were either April, May, or June 2024, talking about those blue states. Now, there were 3 red states on there. Red meaning that there was one lawsuit filed by a Republican attorney general who did not join that common interest agreement back in April, May, or June of 2024. That was generally one case related to marijuana policy involving the Trump administration, but again, not planned so far in advance. Many of the lawsuits against, for example, the Biden administration were Republican lawsuits against the Biden administration, but there were some bipartisan cases and there were some Democratic cases. What we're finding throughout really this last 8 to 12 year history is that it's becoming so much more partisan on both sides of the aisle. The Republican Attorneys General Association and Democratic Attorneys General Association didn't even exist until the late 90s and early 2000s. The people I've interviewed said that it used to be much more common for when attorneys general did band together to file lawsuits, that it was usually more bipartisan. And now it's just becoming kind of a fundraising tool. A lot of these Democratic attorneys general will send out emails to their constituents asking for money, saying, look at the great work we're doing to fight against the Trump administration. We could use your help. It's happening on both sides of the aisle. It is a moneymaker, no matter who you ask, red or blue. And there are just so many lawsuits. The sheer number of it is staggering. There were more than 100 against the Biden administration in his 4 years. We're already at about 100 in under 2 years with Trump.
And it's pretty incredible, all the different states that were involved in this privileged and confidential common interest agreements that the EIU team with the Center Square found. And, we could spend 2 minutes reading off all of these states. But Adam, obviously, people can see that for themselves. Arizona, California, Hawaii, Illinois, Massachusetts, Vermont, Rhode Island. You can go through and read all of those. But get to that story at thecentersquare.com and hover over your state to be able to find out more details about this. But as you mentioned, this is something that Republicans have done in the past. Seems to have been even more so a higher rate with the Democrats opposing Trump. But you did talk, at least the team talked to the Maryland Attorney General, Anthony Brown. What did they have to tell you?
He was a little bit more transparent than some of the others who were downplaying the timing. He admitted, yes, we have been planning this for months, and we needed to be prepared. We didn't want to be caught flat-footed if and when President Trump went into office. There's the exact quote. I was paraphrasing before, but we're pleased that we responded before January 2025. We talked through a host of possibilities. We wanted to be prepared not to get caught off guard. That's a big contrast with the Arizona Attorney General's office, where they said there was nothing significant about that April or May 2024 date. A lot of attorneys general just chose not to comment or to respond to our requests. The California Attorney General just held a press conference earlier this week. He's joined at least 82 lawsuits against the Trump administration, and he defined all of them as apolitical. You can judge for yourself whether you think that's true, because not a single Republican signed that document.
Yeah, it's fascinating that he held that news conference literally the day before this story was set to publish, as the team from the investigating unit was able to put this all together. And Rob Bonta holds a news conference and trying to tout he's saving taxpayer dollars, $200 billion, I think he said, because of the lawsuits he's been involved in, even though those tax-paying dollars are still federal tax-paying dollars coming to the state of California. But that's another story for another day, and I'm sure we're going to get a lot more out of this, Adam, because, as I said at the beginning, this is just one layer of the onion that's being peeled back to see how this works. But we've got this concept of attorney-client privilege that seems to be part of this story as well. Does that exist in this story? And if so, why?
Well, we certainly don't think so, and that's why my colleague in Washington is appealing so many of these pages upon pages upon pages of redacted documents, all withheld for attorney-client privilege. Our argument is that you can't really have attorney-client privilege when these are hypothetical lawsuits against a hypothetical policy instituted by a hypothetical president. You can't argue that 9 months before he takes office, in our opinion. But taking the politics out of all of it, look, we understand that attorneys general are going to put their spin on it, whether they are Democrats or Republicans. They're throwing out all these numbers, statistics, percentages about success rates, amounts of dollars that they claim to have been able to save. Or
$200+ billion, quote unquote, saved, but that's just recapturing federal taxpayer dollars. So
here's how I look at it. There have been a lot of lawsuits, over 100 now, a little less than 100. It's so hard to keep track of the exact number because not every attorney general joins every case. But when we talk about success rates, about 11 of them have been settled in favor of the plaintiffs, and about 4 have been closed in favor of the federal government. Now, obviously, 11 is a bigger number than 4, but so many of these cases have really yet to be decided, and they're still costing money.
Yeah, there's not been finality in a lot of these cases, but the various statistics will be prompted by whatever legislator or elected official wants to use that for their advantage. Adam, what is next with this story? I mean, I've seen, even the Illinois Attorney General, and they have these conferences where they all get together and talk about rights and responsibilities, and they tout their lawsuits. That's another taxpayer cost that you guys are thinking of looking into.
Yeah, well, there's a reason where this show is called The States, right? We cover all 50 of them. Our investigative team has been asking these questions with all 50 states, trying to figure out what communication existed. Are you going to give it up, or are you going to withhold it under some sort of attorney-client privilege? We continue to ask how much these lawsuits are costing the taxpayers. I have been on this show in the past to talk about this topic specifically as it relates to Colorado and their attorney general, who just secured the Democratic primary for his state. So we're looking at this case by case, state by state, trying to figure out the costs, trying to figure out where these lawsuits are going, and trying to figure out what was the strategy, especially now that we know that a document was signed as early as April 2024. Now, it would be pretty rare for a document to be signed on April 2024 without some sort of conversation even predating the drafting and the signing of that document. So at this point, we don't know how far back this goes. Does it go back to March, February? Does it go back to 2023?
Does it go back to 2016?
Well, they would probably tell you it goes back to what we learned from the first Trump administration. We knew, we had an idea of what he wanted to do in his first term in office. He talked about what he wanted to do in his second term in office. But again, we continue to use the word hypothetical because it didn't happen yet.
Adam Herbet's one of the investigative reporters on this story. Greatly appreciate your time, and people should get to the investigative page at thecentersquare.com and sign up for the newsletter so that you can get these and other stories in your inbox daily, only with the Center Square. We'll be right back with more from the States. Data centers continue to dominate headlines across the country, and this week was no exception. Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop. Chesapeake, Virginia is delaying some new data center proposals while it rewrites the rules for where the facilities can be built and how they're reviewed. The Center Square reporter Shirlene Guerrero reports city leaders said that the delay gives them time to develop a clearer framework before making decisions on future projects. That resolution also removes the proposed comprehensive plan amendment from the August 18th agenda to allow for more time to review revisions, research industry best practices, gather public input, and refine the policy. In the pause, it applies only to applications requiring discretionary land use approvals. It doesn't affect projects currently allowed by right under the city zoning ordinance. A councilwoman said that the delay would allow for the city to pump the brakes, take a breath, and get more public input. Meanwhile, a new report says Wisconsin is in need of statewide legislation that ensures large-scale AI data centers in the state all have to follow the same rules and pay for their energy infrastructure. The University of Wisconsin-Madison's Center for Research on the Wisconsin Economy concludes that America will not outbuild China by copying its model. It can compete through private capital, abundant energy, enforceable contracts, and faster construction. The report went on to say Wisconsin has the manufacturers, workforce, land, and industrial experience to compete on those terms. The Center Square reporter John Stife reports the report argues the sales tax exemptions for data centers are reasonable because neighboring states provide the same exemptions, and sales taxes are intended for end-use sales, not suppliers like data centers, where the product would then be subject to sales tax multiple times. The report's entitled Winning the AI Race, Who Should Pay for Wisconsin's Data Center Boom? It cites reporting from the Center Square on the amount of the exempted sales tax for the state's AI data centers, along with a legislative audit bureau analysis that shows $1.5 billion in foregone state sales tax during construction and $369 million annually once four certified projects are fully operational. The report then identified supplying data centers as a large opportunity for Wisconsin's economy to succeed. In Ohio, power regulators are taking steps there that they say are designed to protect large electric consumers from paying higher rates because of data centers. Under a new order by the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, data center customers will have to give AEP Ohio, a large power company, notice when they plan to ramp up electricity usage so that other large consumers don't see power bills increase because of the increased demand from data centers. Down in Louisiana, Meta is refusing to disclose calculations showing how much it expects to invest, how many permanent jobs it'll create, and how much electricity it's planned for that Richland Parish data center. Now, the Center Square, Louisiana reporter Nolan McKendry reports that dispute is part of Entergy's Louisiana application to build a massive portfolio of power plants, battery storage, and transmission infrastructure for Meta's data center campus. Two consumer advocacy groups, the Alliance for Affordable Energy and the Union of Concerned Scientists, they sought 5 categories of records directly from Meta in an effort to challenge the assertion that the data center is in the public interest. Meta challenged that order 4 days later, saying that the requested material includes confidential information and trade secrets and is thus protected from disclosure. And in Texas, Governor Greg Abbott issued another directive related to data centers after a legislative hearing was held and statewide protests are ongoing. Last week, Republican state lawmakers, they backtracked on a law that they previously supported that fast-tracked data center expansion at taxpayers' expense. Some rural Texans have demanded a special session to be called to ban data center expansion in Texas. Ahead of the hearing, multiple anti-data center events were held statewide. Now, Abbott directed the Public Utility Commission of Texas and the Electric Reliability Council of Texas to conduct a comprehensive verification and audit of all data centers advancing through ERCOT's interconnected process. The agencies must complete that audit before any data center project moves forward. So what do data centers have to say about all of this? Well, late last month, we talked to Dan DiOrio, the executive vice president with Data Centers Coalition. He said that they hear those concerns and they're working to address them.
This is an industry that is developing very quickly. We are in an era of unprecedented demand for digital infrastructure, and the industry is building out to really meet that demand and ensure that the U.S. remains the world's leader in advanced technologies while providing the infrastructure that keeps us connected every day. And I think it's certainly true that the data center industry needs to invest, and it is investing in robust community and stakeholder engagement to help communities understand what these projects are and what they aren't, ultimately how they will use resources wisely.
But DiOrio, he also said this isn't just an economic issue or an issue about resource management. He says this is also about national security.
It is essential that the U.S. remains the world's leader in these technologies, because we can do it responsibly and we can build responsibly and apply it responsibly. But I think as we look at our lives today, it is absolutely crucial that we have the ability to store Americans' data here at home safely and securely. This is a national security imperative.
Now, all of this, of course, as data centers might add to the economic viability of an area, might add to property taxes, it might consume too much energy. All of these questions circulating as recent economic indicators show that the U.S. economy lost 23,000 jobs in July. The unemployment rate dropped to 4.1%. That's according to the latest out of the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics released today. Go find that story and others at thecentersquare.com. We'll be right back with more from the States. Welcome back to the States. Now it's time for America's Talking, with headlines from across the country that you can find in the description below or in your inbox with the Center Square newsletter, free at thecentersquare.com. Landlords across the state of California, they face new limits in how much they can increase the rents on their tenants. The Center Square reporter, Robert Mattson, reports under Assembly Bill 1482, the California Tenant Protection Act of 2019, landlords are prohibited from increasing their rental rates more than 5% plus the rate of inflation, or 10%, whichever is lower, over a 12-month period. Low and middle income Wisconsin students fared better after multiple years in private school choice programs that comparable public school students did, according to a new peer-reviewed study. The Center Square reporter John Stife reports the Wisconsin Institute of Law and Liberty found students fared better on the English language arts portion of the Wisconsin Forward exam in the schools, with vouchers funding the cost $5,000 for K-8 students and $2,500 for high school students. Now, the study looked at the results for 100,000 students between 2018 and 2019 and 2022 and 2023, and it found that students in the Wisconsin, Milwaukee, and Racine programs, they advanced further than those in the Milwaukee and statewide school choice programs for 4 or more years, gaining the equivalent of 1 additional year of education. Georgia's small businesses continue to struggle with finding qualified workers, even as businesses say that they are hiring. According to the National Federation of Independent Business, the Center Square associate editor Kim Jarrett reports the NFIB randomly surveyed 883 businesses nationwide. Job openings are up 36%. That's up 4 points from June to July. And it's the highest level since June 2025, according to the organization. But labor availability remains an issue, rising 8 points to 27%. Georgia businesses are having the same issue. According to the Georgia NFIB director, the number of businesses surveyed that are planning to hire in the next 3 months increased by 9% from June to July, reaching a net of 20%. And in Arizona, the Navajo Nation is turning to flock safety to help tackle crime despite privacy concerns by other governments. The Center Square contributor Zachary Schmidt reports America's largest Native American reservation will deploy Flock Safety's license plate reader cameras to help cover the 27,000 square mile reservation that spans Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. As the Navajo Nation is using Flock Safety cameras to assist with law enforcement, other parts of Arizona, they're pushing back against them. You've got a policy strategist for the American Civil Liberties Union of Arizona telling the Center Square that people are worried about how their privacy is being violated. Residents in Sedona, they rebuffed Flock Safety cameras and saw its city council cancel its contract with the company in September of 2025. 3 months later, Flagstaff City Council, they terminated its contract with Flock Safety after residents raised concerns. And that's just some of what America is talking about. You can get these and other headlines at thecentersquare.com. From my studio in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop. And join us back here next week for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from all across the country, only with the States, powered by the Center Square.